I see people using the gym, using that as an outlet, like fitness and activity as an outlet to suppress those thoughts. Maybe they don't even recognize they've had some kind of trauma in their life, and that's how they avoid or evade facing the reality.
Avoidance is really the root of suffering after a trauma. That the brain is trying to make sense of what happened or what has happened over a long period of time. A lot of people find addiction. They get addicted to some kind of substance or some kind of to food and even exercise, something that can be a distraction from this pain that I'm in all the time.
If you've ever had a client open up mid-set and you thought to yourself, man, I am really out of my depth right now, this episode is for you. Today, I'm sitting down with trauma therapist Ashley Riehle, and we're going to talk about what nobody trains gym owners or trainers on, how exercise, trauma, anxiety, and even spiritual pain interact, and where our jobs stop. A lot of people aren't just trying to lose 20 pounds. Sometimes they're trying to outlift their past, outrun their memories, and just numb out with macros or MyFitnessPal. And if you're the one they trust most, you're already on the front lines whether you like it or not. Stay to the end of this episode and you'll walk away with 3 big things. A simple way to tell if your clients are using the gym to heal or hide. The exact language you can use when something big gets dropped on you, so you can help without accidentally causing more harm. A non-threatening way to talk about therapy without labeling or making them feel more broken. If you are a gym owner, trainer, or someone who just uses the gym to keep your head above water, this conversation with Ashley might just change the way that you see mental health and movement for good. Let's get into it. All right, Ashley, so great to have you on the show today. And we're going to talk about a few things off air. We had a little bit of a conversation, but I really want everyone to know who's listening that in the gym space that I've worked in, a lot of times, both on the client side, the gym owner side, and the personal trainer side, there are many times when the clients, the personal training clients, they feel like they have, since they have a great relationship with the trainers end up coming into a position where they are answering questions that may not necessarily be in their area of expertise. And they feel, I hear this commonly, I'm also a therapist, right? Trainers a lot of times say that. And so I want to make sure that we cover some topics that I think are of value for both the trainers, the gym owners, but also for clients out there who might be struggling with some type of trauma, and they can get something out of this and they go, you know what, that makes a lot of sense. This is how I can cope with this. So welcome to the show. And that's kind of some of the things that we're gonna tackle today.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So a lot of people listening, they use the gym, and they use the gym for a way to cope with stress, cope with anxiety, maybe even spiritual pain. From where you sit as a trauma therapist, what's the number one thing the average person's getting wrong about how exercise and mental health actually kind of work together?
That's a good question. I think, especially when it comes to trauma is stored so physically. I think a lot of people who have been through intense things don't want to engage with the physical body, that there can be a lot of the trauma that they've experienced has been because of their physical body. And so I've seen a lot of disconnection from it. And the average person, maybe not the average person that listens to your podcast, but the average person wants to stay distant from their body. So I actually think exercise is such a beautiful therapeutic thing for people who have been through trauma. As long as they're not using it as a way to avoid and a way to, if my body is perfect, then I'll be fine. Or if I can just reach these goals, these fitness goals, then I'll be fine. I'm reaching for this. But if done well, physical fitness and exercise can be such a profound healing thing.
So I see, and I've seen this personally with family members, and I've also seen it with friends. They go through some kind of traumatic experience in life. And a lot of times, even when I speak of trauma, those listening, they might have this idea of trauma as, trauma from war, right? Something very, very drastic, or an accident, like a car crash, some kind of traumatic experience like that. I'm also talking about the hidden traumas, the things that compound and stack up over time from the time you were a child and maybe you didn't notice it. But I see people using the gym, using that as an outlet, like fitness and activity as an outlet to suppress those thoughts. Maybe they don't even recognize they've had some kind of trauma in their life. And that's how they avoid or evade facing the reality or looking in the mirror and going, hey, this is something I gotta face. How can you reframe that? How can you help someone? Because if you're a gym owner or you're a trainer and you're recognizing this, how can you help them cope? How can you help them overcome some of those experiences? And can you give some examples of trauma that might be that compounding effect that happens over time? So
Sure.
kind of two things there that I'm throwing at you. One is that compound effect of traumatic experiences, or just trauma through daily life and the way that maybe someone perceives something as a child as they grow up, and how it impacts them. And then also the way that that same person who's been impacted, how they're coping with it through exercise as a mechanism to evade or avoid having to face it.
I think a lot of people do think of trauma as this like one-time discrete event. That PTSD used to be called shell-shocked, right? That it refers to, oh, I went somewhere and something terrible happened. My normal life was great before this terrible thing happened, and now I'm different, which is, it still counts as PTSD. And you're talking about the more subtle, more chronic, like way that people have treated you over time, whether that's your parents or that's your partner, or that's your friends, that can be such a buildup that leads to a similar and sometimes more extreme, often more extreme experience of trauma, experience of the post-traumatic stress disorder, whether that's diagnosable or not, that there are those avoidance tendencies. And I love that you zero in on this concept of avoiding and evading, because I think that is so crucial to our understanding of trauma and when you're healing and when you're not. That avoidance is really the root of suffering after a trauma. That the brain is trying to make sense of what happened or what has happened over a long period of time. And if the brain cannot process it, you stay stuck in that. And so people who are stuck in that, their brain is kind of repeating it over and over. They keep going back to it. They're ruminating on it. It's the natural human instinct to want to avoid that. Let me distract myself. Can I, a lot of people find addiction. They get addicted to some kind of substance or some kind of to food and even exercise, something that can be a distraction from this pain that I'm in all the time. And I think with exercise specifically, it can become, I'm trying to prove something to myself. Like if I'm trying to prove how strong I am or how fast I am or how competent my body is. And so I think for exercise specifically, it's such a double-edged sword because it can be so helpful in the processing of trauma. And your key word there of avoiding is what we look for. Are you using this as something to help you process, or are you using this as something to avoid thinking about it and pushing it away? And it's tough because the person themselves has to come to that recognition that people like me in my position or people like you in your position can't always force that self-awareness of, hey, I think this is an avoidance. That person has to come to that conclusion.
Can you give an example of what that might look like? Because I don't think it's recognizable. I mean, even for parents who are raising kids, I can tell you, for certainty that most parents probably would say, hey, if you could tell me exactly what I might be doing wrong or what I might do better, so that way I don't put my children in a position of feeling a particular way when they get older, where they, to your point, they have this trauma. What is the trauma, right? What's the trauma? Because it's really hard as a parent to go, I'm doing these particular things, which is causing my child to maybe act a certain way, not recognizable, right? Because it's that small little compound effect that happens over time. And then they get to a point where you do recognize that they're escaping something. How can you, as a therapist, help guide those parents or even those who are experiencing trauma, one, to recognize that these are the do's and the don'ts as a parent so that children can be raised in a healthier way. And then for those who are experiencing the trauma, for them, to be able to recognize actually that they are in a position of going, hey, like something's wrong here, right? Like I'm either finding an addiction, like you mentioned, or I'm exercising all the time to escape something. Like there's something, those are signs, right? But not everybody's recognizing those warning signs. So can you help describe this so it's a little bit more tangible for people to go, that's what it is?
Sure. Yeah. I think to preface, parents are under so much pressure. I think most parents want to be really good parents. And so I want to say some of this stuff, but I want to preface it with like, guilt is helpful to a point. And if you're drowning in guilt about this, like self-compassion can be a really helpful thing here. But to your point of like emotional intelligence or how to raise an emotionally intelligent child and so that they don't get stuck in patterns like this, I think it comes down to teaching an acceptance of emotions. And what I mean, like, so like a specific example, let's say like a kid starts crying. A kid like is holding their ice cream cone and they drop their ice cream cone and they stop crying. A parent's instinct or a caregiver's instinct is to help, right? Like, oh no, shh, stop crying. We'll get you another one. Or, hey, stop crying. Like we're in public, like quiet, be quiet. Like stop feeling that thing. This kid is experiencing maybe anger, maybe sadness, maybe grief, maybe, whatever they're experiencing, but they get this message to stop. Like what you're doing is making people uncomfortable. You need to handle that. You need to like take whatever emotion you're feeling and put that away or stop feeling it. And I think it comes in a lot of ways. Like the parent who's like, no, it's okay. Shh, is trying to be helpful. And you are also reinforcing this idea that emotion, especially an uncomfortable emotion like sadness or grief or anger, is wrong and bad. And it should be covered up if you want to engage with people. So while it's a very natural instinct and can come from a very like loving place, I would encourage parents to pay attention to when they're trying to quiet the emotions of their children or redirect their emotions of their children into like if a kid expresses sadness about something, to be like, oh no, like, but you're so smart or you're so this, to try and reassure them. But I would say to first connect with them in that sadness and give the message to them that it's okay that they're sad. Being sad is normal. Sometimes your mom gets sad too.
So how would you approach that situation, right? So kid drops, my son, 2 years old, right? This is probably common for a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old. Mm-hmm. Drops their ice after they just got it, right? I mean, they're super excited they got this treat. Drops it on the ground. It's no good. And they're crying. What's the appropriate message?
Yeah, because to say, oh, you're not allowed to go get the kid another ice cream or like, it's not that. But just to connect first and then redirect.
And what would that be? What's that look like?
Depending on your kid, because different kids have different temperaments. I would get down eye level with the kid, like, oh, honey, I'm so sorry. Give them a hug. And then like see what they say. If they're like, oh, I dropped my ice cream or I really wanted this or, whatever they're saying, just stay with them for a couple seconds in that. Don't jump in and try to stop them from feeling the feeling. Let them have the feeling. Unless they're hurting somebody, if they're starting to be violent or they're starting to hurt someone, then you can say, hey, it's okay to be sad. It's not okay to hit. I'm going to move you to a place where you're safe or we're keeping other people safe. So barring like physical damage or anything like that, to connect with them first, to join them in that emotion, and afterward to then redirect them. Like, hey, do you want to go get another one? Would that help? But that crucial moment of not jumping right to that in your anxiety. Because when you see your kid crying, you're having an emotional reaction of, oh no, like I want to help this, or I'm embarrassed by this, or whatever it is. To pause, put your emotion like not in in that interaction, that your emotion doesn't need to come in and like smother their emotion, connect with them with their emotion to teach them that their emotion was okay. And then you can redirect to something else.
So I grew up in a household of boys. I would say pretty tough family in general from the perspective of the way that we were raised. And if you go back, several, I would say a few generations, it doesn't have to be too far back. My parents were spanked. They were sometimes, whipped with an actual whip from a tree. That got passed down. And, we were spanked, and sometimes I wouldn't say abused. Today it would be called abuse. And I think most of us, my brothers, I think we all turned out pretty well. We were never really coddled, and we were never put in a position like it's okay to show emotion. It was like, hey, you're crying, like, toughen up, buddy. Like, put some dirt on it and let's get after it. Today is a little different. Even for you as a therapist, I think the narrative is a little different. I remember being in grade school, my first grade teacher, Mrs. Miller, never forget her name. She had the authority to go ahead and spank kids. And I remember I'd never got in that kind of trouble, but it was always like the fear, because we've seen kids get pulled up to the classroom and bent over her knees and spanked. Our principal had a wooden paddle, and he would spank kids. My teacher, Mrs. Miller, in first grade, she would whip people with her ruler. So I don't know what happened to all those kids, but I can tell you most of them seem like they turned out pretty well. The narrative today, I feel, is a little bit more on the go soft, don't push. But on the flip side of it, it's like, well, how soft is too soft, right? Are we softening to the point that men are no longer men? Boys don't become men. Boys become soft. And girls don't become proper. They get away with too much stuff, or boys get away with too much stuff. Where's the line with that?
Such a good question. And I think a lot of people have a similar reaction to this sort of like joining a kid in their emotions. And it's like, the world is not a nice place sometimes. Like, you don't want to lose out on an opportunity to prepare your kid for the hard realities of life.
Yeah,
sometimes you do need to toughen up.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. So it's such a valid concern. And I think that something about corporal punishment, like you're saying, a lot of people have experienced that. It's not necessarily going to make someone completely incompetent in their future. And I think fear is a pretty effective tactic to get people to obey, right? And so
we were good in class.
Yeah, right? Like, it will get the job done for sure. Mm-hmm. And I think it's where I'm seeing like the downside of it. And again, not to say that it's going to make somebody effective, their life is ruined if they got hit as a child, but that if you teach that like the way to handle emotion is through control and power like that, that message persists. And then some of the things we see in like, I hate this emotion that I have. I feel so stupid, or I feel so weak. I just have to muscle through it, remains the instinct. And I think I'm thinking of it as more of like a balance here, because there's a lot to be said about resilience. There's a lot to be said about, hey, sometimes you do have to wipe your tears and get up and keep moving. And so any kind of work that we do on the emotional acceptance side of things is not meant to take away from that. It's just to like join with that, to be a complement to that, so that I don't get too extreme in one direction or too extreme in the other direction. But if I am working with someone who has a lot of anger at their own feelings, like if they get sad or they get embarrassed or they get, I don't know, like any kind of emotion that is uncomfortable for them, often the initial response to it is frustration. I'm so frustrated that I feel this. Like, why can't I just toughen up and do this? And that frustration is not always super effective. It can be, in the same way that fear is a very good motivator, but that to have more of a like, okay, it makes sense that I feel that. I accept that I can feel that. And now I got to get up and get back to work. That it doesn't need to take away from now I got to get up and get back to work, but it's just something to do first, instead of being really harsh with yourself, or instead of like dismissing that emotion and saying it's crazy or stupid or weak. That it can be step one to connect, and then step two to redirect.
Okay. What do you feel about ayahuasca treatments? How do you feel about them?
I mean, there's something there. I personally am not trained in that sort of thing.
So to give context for the listeners, if you don't know what ayahuasca is, and I'm not a pro at this by any means, but the little bit that I've read and learned about it is that it's a hallucinogenic, and it helps people understand who are taking it through a proper medical practitioner, helps them understand their deep-rooted problems. So, for example, if there's a trauma, the ones that I'm trying to describe here are trying to get Ashley to kind of identify. So there's something tangible so you can kind of wrap your head around or wrap your hands around the idea, is that through these treatments, individuals will go through a practice where they're taken through medication, and they're kind of guided through a process of understanding really what the root cause is, so that way they could face it, or they potentially can face it. So, it's banned here in the US. There are several other countries that allow it. And what are your thoughts about this, Ashley? What do you think about this process? Like, are you for it? Are you against it?
Yeah, I think hallucinogenics have such a crazy potential for the brain. And I mean, the current pharmacology that we use there's a lot of SSRIs as a really common, it's a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, the classic like antidepressants or anti-anxiety medication. And they work really well for a lot of people. And there are a lot of people that don't find success with them. And I think there's a lot of potential in some of these more hallucinogenic class drugs. And I would say to be used, again, as a way to find the root of something and not as a way to avoid something. There's always the risk when it comes to a substance of, am I using this as a way to escape? And I think you're right. To identify a root cause, amazing. That's excellent work to be doing in your internal world. If it becomes some kind of escape or detachment from reality, that's when it can be a problem.
So for that person who's listening right now, and they're grinding it out in the gym, right? They're tracking every calorie when they go home. They feel like they're doing everything right. And for them, things just still feel broken on the inside. What do they need to understand about trauma, maybe anxiety or spiritual abuse, that nobody really ever told them?
That's a big question. And I don't know that there's a one-size-fit-all answer to that. But I do think that in general, I would guide them toward this internal work. What are you avoiding? What kind of emotions in yourself are you running away from? That level.
To your point, are there questions that they can ask themselves? Like, if you could put 3 questions together and someone could do a little bit of self-work, what would those questions be?
To someone who is in a very highly controlled mindset, they're very I'm tracking every calorie. I never miss a day. If I miss a day, I feel terrible about myself. Yeah, I think, 3 questions. Let me think about it.
It doesn't have to be 3. You just give me what comes to the top of mind.
Sure. I guess.
You're helping that person now.
Yeah. I would ask them, when did this start? Of has this been since you were really, really young? Has this been as long as you can remember? Did this happen after something happened in your 20s, after you got broken up with? What's the origin of this sort of rigidity that you're having? Because I think, again, it's that balance of things of on the negative side, we can call that rigidity. On the positive side, we can call that self-discipline. And so there's the line of at what point is this helpful and what point is this hurtful? So that might be another question. I would say, when did this start for you? Just to start that reflection process of, why do I do this? When did I become this way? And then into, is this helping me or is this hurting me? And at what point did it change from helping me to hurting me?
If you've made it this far into the episode, thank you. I don't take your time or your attention lightly. So if anything that I've shared today has sparked an idea, challenged you in any way, maybe challenged your perspective on things, or just helps you see your business a little differently, I'd love for you to do 2 quick things. First, head over to YouTube, search Sweat Success Podcast, and hit that subscribe button. Next, please go to bizops.com. I've put together a handful of free resources there that you can download to help you grow your business, improve your systems, and create real freedom. They're all available right now. There's no strings attached. I just appreciate you being here. Let's get back to the show. That's good. Now, I want to talk directly to the gym owners and the trainers, those who are facing questions like this, right? Facing clients or members who are involved in having these types of personal conversations with you. And, most gym owners and trainers, I like to believe that they care very deeply. I always say that they're natural nurturers, right? They want to nurture their clients, which is why they got into the profession they got into. And by doing so, they have this instinct to help by answering questions or guiding, being that voice of reason, but they have no formal mental health training. So what are common ways that maybe you've seen or you've heard of where trainers or gym coaches or gym managers are accidentally harming those same people who are carrying this trauma or anxiety or religious baggage versus helping them?
Yeah. I think, like you said, I think the vast majority of personal trainers or gym owners are coming from that place of let me help you. And so when people say things like going to the gym is my therapy, I truly understand the sentiment. Like as a therapist, I'm not trying to gatekeep wellness, and that I think it can be therapeutic, and that it's not quite the same thing as therapy. And to your question there about what becomes harmful,
and I would broaden this a bit more too, because it's maybe not just trainers and gym owners, but that same sentiment also comes across from good friends, right? When that person is sharing intimate details about a situation or asking for advice, that friend who is also not formally trained, they might come across by giving some advice that may not actually be beneficial.
Yeah.
So how do you temper that? What would you say to those people who are trying to help?
Yeah, I would say like good for trying to help. And where I think it becomes a little dangerous is when your advice comes from your own experience. So like, for example, if I'm in a session with someone and they're talking about their dad, and then I start thinking about my dad and I'm thinking about, oh, you have to do this, right? But I'm not coming from a place of grounded like distance or advice. I'm speaking from my own experience, which can be valuable, but that isn't necessarily applicable. And so part of mental health training is very much, as a therapist, I have to be tracking what my like experiences are when someone says something, what kind of emotion am I having? And I have to be in this very mindful state where I can say, oh, I got angry about that, but that has nothing to do with them. That has a lot to do with me. So anytime that you're trying to help someone, you're trying to counsel someone, and you're not in this therapeutic role, I would couch it in like, this is personal advice. This is something like I've found helpful for me, and not necessarily something that will be helpful for you, because it's not grounded in the same sort of, it's not grounded in the research. It's coming from my gut reaction from my experiences, but that's one data point, not necessarily always helpful for everybody.
So if they're in that position, always good to help, right? Always good to lend a ear, because sometimes that's all that someone might need is just for someone to listen. But maybe coming from the angle of first stating these words, I understand where you're coming from. This is what helped me in this similar situation, not exact same situation, but this is what helped me in this similar situation. And that's how I found XYZ, end result. And I'm sure if you talk to somebody else that's a pro, I'm not a pro, but if you talk to somebody who's a pro, they're going to probably give you a little bit better feedback. Do you think that would help if you approached it in that directive?
Yes, I think you put together a really good script there for someone to use. And I would add, especially if it gets into areas of past trauma, people are talking about like, I have nightmares about this, or I can't stop thinking about this, and I have these symptoms of trauma. Or if I'm having thoughts of like self-harm or having thoughts of like suicide, that would be the type of like area that I would say to.
How do you cover that? That's a really good one, from the perspective of someone who's in the position of hearing from that person, and maybe you can recognize signals. How do you handle that so you still stay on that person's good side without them, because sometimes interventions are needed, but they're always like a really concerning thing to do because you fear that you're going to overstep bounds and create more harm.
Mhm.
How do you approach that? So that way you're doing it, because obviously everyone's doing it with the best intention, right? They want to help, but how do you do it so it's not overbearing and it's not controlling, right? Because
Yeah.
to the point of control, maybe this is where the trauma came in from the first place, was control.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it reminds me of what we were talking about earlier with the ice cream cone, that a lot of time, like if your friend is expressing something like this, you have a very strong reaction of like, oh no, like that's really scary that you're thinking that, or wow, what do I do about this? Or no, you're fine. I'm going to watch you 24 hours a day to make sure you don't do anything. That you have this fear that comes up in you, or you have this sadness that comes up in you, and then you might be a little overbearing. So I think the instinct again is very human, and that I would recommend being a listener, like that people in that position aren't necessarily going to be able to uh, change your thoughts in that moment. If someone's thinking I'm not worth anything, or it would be better if I wasn't around, you can offer like a different perspective and be like, hey, that's not how I think of you. Like, I really care about you. I think you did so good at this, or I think you did so good at that. But to stay in that listener/supportive role and not necessarily diving into and taking apart where those thoughts came from. That because you're not trained as a mental health professional, that sometimes your emotions are going to get in the way there because you care about this person so much, or you're so scared of them doing something, you're being a little frantic in that moment. And a therapist, like someone like me who talks about like suicide people all the time, like several times a day, a lot of the time, that I don't have the same emotional reactivity to suicidal ideation because I've been trained in a way that like, okay, I know how to do this. Someone's talking about that. I don't have the same sort of like, oh no, like we have to do something right now.
Right.
Yeah, I can be concerned. I'm not saying it's casual, but that my own emotions don't come in and smother their emotions in the same way that sometimes that tends to happen in other conversations.
So if you led them down the path of maybe asking questions like, why would you think that about yourself? You could potentially increase the likelihood of them actually thinking that it's the right decision, because now you're helping them reaffirm their decisions. Is that something that's...
I would stay away. I mean, to be a listener, to say like, hey, like, how's today been? Or like, how's your thoughts today? Or what can I do to help? Or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Those kinds of questions are great. Trying to like get into the inner workings of it, of the trauma and things like that, that's a little dangerous. That's the type of thing that I think should be done by a mental health professional. And someone in the position of a helper who's starting to feel their own overwhelm rise up in a moment like this, be like, hey, I'm here for you. I care about you a lot. I know a good therapist who can help you with this. And it not in a way of like, I'm trying to offload you onto somebody of like, I can't handle this. Like, hey, I want to talk about this with you. And I also want you to get professional help. Like, there are people who know how to do this. They do this all the time. I'm your friend. I'm with you. And let's bring in someone else.
So there's two sides of the coin on this one. One is the person who intentionally looks for attention, right? So it's, I will do this thing if this thing doesn't happen for me. And so then they receive attention for that. I don't know where that stems from. I've seen it happen. And then I was in a relationship one time, and this person told me, she said that she was going to kill herself. And I'd heard it so many times. Now, she actually didn't, which is great. But I heard it so many times, and I was young. So, of course, I didn't have much formal experience, still don't today, in these types of situations. And I was just frustrated and angry. So I just said, no, you won't, stop calling me, type of thing. And, a more mature, better version of me probably would have handled that situation differently. And as I think through that, I go, other people who I know need help. The moment I mention therapy, in their mind, or at least I think in their mind, they think therapist means there's something wrong with them. So therapy is kind of like this negative phrase that they might use. Like, I'm seeing a therapist, that is a negative phrase that they might use. Or they might be feeling that's how they're perceived. And so the optics of it is kind of this negative thing. Like, I'm a nutbag. I'm crazy. I have something wrong with me because I'm seeing a therapist to get fixed. How do you frame it so that way somebody who is in that position, or even someone who's listening, they go, you know what? It's not a bad thing. Like, I just need a third party. I just need a voice that can speak to me unbiased and give me a different perspective on things that I'm kind of looking through. How do you phrase this, or how do you frame it if you're trying to help someone? Because I've been in those positions where say, like, you really need to see someone, like you need to see a therapist. And then that turns into, you think I'm crazy.
Feels like a rejection. Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you work through that?
Yeah, it's a tough one. And I think it's one that, like, we can adjust our phrasing, and we can be really careful about how to put it to them. And at the end of the day, you can phrase it perfectly and it still might not be well received. So there's that, like, let's talk about it. Let's establish like some strategies for it. And also know that this is not something that's completely within our control, because therapy is it's a strange interaction in that it's like, I'm going to go talk to a stranger who went to school to learn how to listen and tell them all my problems. Like, it is a strange thing. And I think what comes to my mind when we're talking about the stigma of therapy is that, from a therapist point of view, I have nothing but respect for my clients. That it takes so much bravery to get into that space where you're willing to talk to someone and willing to talk about the things that you're most ashamed about, or the things that are most painful to you. To confront emotion like that is the bravest thing in the world. I find, so I get so inspired by my clients that, like, I think sometimes maybe it's seen as like, oh, the therapist is going to sit there and, like, they've got their little notepad and they're going to, like, write down all my pathology. And, like, we're definitely putting together puzzle pieces. Like, we're looking for how these things fit together, where they came from, and that sort of thing. But in my experience, and the good therapists that I know very much see their clients as that's a strength. That's something, if you're able to come to this place and you're able to set aside time and you have the bravery to look at yourself and to reflect on yourself and to change, especially when people in your life aren't necessarily changing, I think it's so brave. It's so awe-inspiring to me.
I mentioned earlier that I think fitness is really kind of one of the best medicative tools that anyone can use, both physically and mentally, because it helps balance you, right? I mean, we're in this state of being where we sit most of our day. When we were young, I was just having this conversation with my wife the other day about how body fat increases and hormones get adjusted, chemicals get released differently as we age, but not necessarily because we age. It's because of our inactivity. And it's not because our inactivity is so low. It's that we have not been able to identify ways in our day to move. And we get into a position, and I shouldn't say that our inactivity, so it's not that our calories are so high. It's that we've not identified a way that where we take breaks, right? Think about as a child, and I'll get to my point here in a second, but think about as a child, we move all the time, right? We go to school, and if we're not in school, I mean, there's always breaks where we're moving. It's a little bit of teaching, 20 to 40 minutes, and another moving session. I remember as a child, it was a bike ride to school or a walk to school or a jog home. We had recess, we had PE, we had extracurricular activities after school. We were always playing with other kids. And today's a little different. And I was thinking about it, and like, if we hit that 10,000 step mark, right? It's like 7,500 technically, but if we hit the 10,000 step mark, that's about 5 miles, because for every 2,000 steps is about a mile. So you think about that, yeah, a lot of people just aren't moving 5 miles a day, because that's kind of a lot. When you think 10,000 steps, not a big deal, but 5 miles is a big deal. So that inactivity has a huge impact on the way we feel in our mental health. So circling back to to mental health and how this all kind of ties together, I feel that fitness is potentially that fix, but I also feel like that there's this gap between therapists and the practitioners that are in therapy, the medical practitioners that are guiding people, even in medicine, that a lot of times the solution is things like Ozempic or things like for weight loss or things like anti-anxiety or anti-depression medication that you'd mentioned earlier. And those are like, for me, a Band-Aid, right? It doesn't solve the problem. And what is it going to take? And if we were to get it right over the next 10 years, what do you hope that relationship looks like between therapist and the fitness industry? And what's one small step you want every listener to take after this episode to kind of help make that happen?
That is a great question. I think I would be thrilled if every single one of my clients went to the gym regularly or got steps in regularly. I think it would be amazingly helpful to them. And I wonder if there would be gym owners and trainers who would say the same thing about therapy. If it would be amazing if each of my clients here got into therapy. So I think the joining of those two could be a very powerful, very, very powerful fix. I think, when it comes to like what can everyone do? Because I'm on the therapy side of it, I would say something about self-awareness and self-reflection, asking yourself these questions of, how am I using exercise? Is this something that is helping me? Is it something that's hurting me? Is it a little bit of both? In what ways am I using it to avoid? And I mean, we all avoid things sometimes. Like, I think it's a little unrealistic to say you're never allowed to scroll. You're never allowed to dissociate. Yeah. You're never allowed to like watch a show, or you're obviously use that when you need to, especially if it's keeping you safe, right? And that to start to look inward and reflect on that inner world to see, what's the purpose of this? Why am I doing this? To reflect inward and to say, what's going on internally here? You mentioned that sometimes like using some kind of medication could be a Band-Aid. I think exercise could be the same thing, like depending on the person. That, are we really getting to the core issue here? And it can be a great thing. Medication can be a great thing. Exercise can be a great thing. It kind of depends person to person level. What function is this having in your system? Is it a Band-Aid? Is it covering something up? Is it allowing you to avoid some of that deeper work that needs to get done? Or is it helping you access that deeper work?
That's good. So 2 things for you before we leave. One, can you give those gym owners, trainers, or even people who are having conversations with their friends who are going through a tough state, some trauma, that those friends express those feelings. Give maybe just a quick rundown on the questions that you might be able to ask or the way that you can guide them, because you had mentioned earlier that you kind of want to like reframe the information and get their attention onto something else. What is it that you can do as that person, the trainer, the gym owner, the friend who's having this conversation with this person who's going through this traumatic experience and having this conversation with you? So that's the first thing. Can you give some actionable advice and information that they can take away? And for those who are just generally, listening through this podcast and this show on a regular basis, and they're here and they're going, you know what? I feel like crap sometimes. I feel depressed. I feel like I have a little bit of anxiety, or they recognize those feelings in themselves, or they're recognizing that they're taking up on some kind of addiction to suppress emotion or suppress feeling. What questions can they ask themselves so they can take the next right step? Things they can do today.
Okay. Yeah. So that first one, being in that position of support. How can I support someone who's going through this? I think we mentioned some of those, like to be a support to them in like, hey, I'm here for you, or like, hey, how are you feeling today? How's this week been for you? Like, what's been hard about this week? And responding in a very like validating way, like, man, yeah, like that sucks, or that makes sense, or yeah, that is hard, or anything like that, and keep it in that very supportive, and then redirect potentially to have you talk to someone, or do you want to talk to someone? Or my sister talked to someone and she found it really helpful, or, like kind of link in that, because I think therapy is great, but obviously I'm
Very
biased.
nonchalant, not like, not in a forceful way, but more in a just like natural, like, hey, yeah, so-and-so did this. And they always said it worked really well for them.
Yeah, I think that's more effective. Control and kind of strong arming people it doesn't really work. I mean, like we said before, it can change behavior, but it doesn't really change internal worlds. You can make kids behave if they're afraid of getting hit, but does it change their internal world? Does it make them intrinsically want to behave, or is it more of an external thing? So yeah, I think in like kind of a forceful way is not super effective. Maybe one exception to that is if someone is in imminent danger. They say, I have a plan, I'm going to hurt myself. You can be a little bit more strong in that situation of, hey, I'm going to take you to the hospital. Or, hey, I'm going to help you stay alive in this moment. Apart from that, if someone is not intending to hurt themselves, I would stay very much in the, I'm here to support you. How can I help you? What do you need? Have you thought about this? Because most people who are in that kind of state have thought about going to see someone, but there's some kind of barrier, whether it's, my insurance, or I don't know if I can find someone, or this or this or that, to help talk them through that, because it's already been on their mind more than likely, to just be a voice in their life of, hey, this could be really helpful for you. And I would add potentially modeling it, of like, hey, I went to therapy and I loved it, or I did this, or my sister did this, or my mom did this, or whatever, like using positive examples to hopefully address some of that stigma of, this doesn't mean that you're broken. This doesn't mean that you're weird and that we reject you. This is the type of thing that we do, that people in our community, people like you and me, we can do. It's a resource. It's something brave to do.
I like that. How does the person who's listening ask the right questions for themselves, that are in this state of being where they feel broken, they feel depressed, they feel down, right? They just don't want to get up out of bed today. They don't feel like they have any purpose. They don't feel any sense of interest or motivation in anything, or path or guidance, right? I mean, those are common things. I think it's very common for a lot of people to go through that. What is it that you would have them ask themselves to break past a couple of those barriers to get to the next step?
First of all, to acknowledge how difficult that is. And I think there's a lot of value in like asking yourself questions, and that I can imagine someone listening to this is like, that they might feel kind of exhausted at the thought of that, of like, oh, I have to pull myself out of this, right? Like, so just to acknowledge how difficult this is. And then if they're in a place where they feel ready to do that kind of work, I would say to take stock of your environment, internal and external. What's going on here on an internal level, on an external level, that is contributing to this feeling? Do I not get enough sunlight? Do I only eat Doritos? Am I mean to myself? Am I considering myself a failure? Is my relationship with my partner really stressing me out? Like, whatever it is. And I'm sure that there are a lot of people who they have these reasons pretty present to them, but I would do more of a full analysis of the internal and external environment. Like, how does from the moment I wake up, what am I doing? And is this helping me or is this hurting me? Scrolling on my phone. Maybe I'm connecting with people. Maybe I'm talking to friends. Maybe I'm looking at social media and thinking about how worthless I am because my body doesn't look like that. Whatever it is, just start to keep track moment to moment throughout your day, from the time you wake up to the time you go to sleep. What is contributing to this feeling and what is helping mitigate this feeling? And once you have a sense of that, of these factors, of like what's filling my cup, what's taking from my cup, you can start to work toward, how do I amplify the things that help and how do I minimize the things that hurt?
I like that. So maybe just kind of like an inventory checklist of end of day. Here we go. This is what was garbage about my day. And this is what made me feel that way. And this is what made me feel really good. Like I did this one thing and it made me feel amazing. So identifying those pain points. And to your point, and I'm not a therapist, so you can, feel free to just like stop me where I'm at and correct me. But I would think that anyone taking inventory control like that, also being aware that it's not a one-time thing, right? You don't take an inventory check just one day and go, okay, that's what it is, and this is what I monitor, because you might have had an argument with your partner, right? Your spouse, your girlfriend or your boyfriend or whoever was in that scenario that day. So at the end of the day, that is the thing that you put on a negative list, like this ruined my day. But 90% of the time, that's the one thing that keeps you moving forward, right?
Yes.
So that's just a perspective from my own angle, because I journal. I don't do it all the time. I should do it way more often. But I've recognized also that even in my own journaling, sometimes when I'm taking that inventory check, not exactly how you mentioned it, but I probably should do it that way. I also recognize, man, I should just do more of this, right? Because I don't do that. I don't go, wow, I don't have those like two clear columns. But I think that's a great tool to use. So thank you so much, Ashley. It was wonderful having you on the show today. Really valuable advice. And for the gym owners and trainers and those who are clients or those who are just listening, take note on those things that Ashley has given as guidance and some valuable tools and kind of little tactics you can use throughout your day to help you get to that next step, that next stage, overcome anxiety, overcome depression, and really get to a point where you feel great and use exercise for the right reasons. And Ashley, where can they find you?
Yeah, I can be contacted. Emails usually the best for any kind of questions or anything like that. My email address is ashley@evolvecounseling.co. I'm on LinkedIn. My name is Ashley Riehle.
And we'll put that in the show notes so they can reach out to you.
Perfect. Okay. It's been so fun to be here. I really appreciate this opportunity to speak to your audience.
Anything that you mentioned, we'll make sure that we have those in the show notes so that way they can grab it and connect with you. Again, Ashley, Thank you so much. And for everyone else listening, keep going, keep doing the right things, and I'll see you guys on the flip side.